That's what the next test we're going to do is lighting. John, let me know.
We're good.
Are you serious? No lights?
I mean, this isn't Hollywood, but it'll.
Are we just waiting to sign in anywhere?
Good question, but no, I'll get everybody marked out. So, there's few, there's. Is that better, John? I feel like I'm an eye doctor.
We're still good.
Better?
It's all about you, John.
Do you have a preference, Kelly?
I do not. Whatever works better for
I think it's better.
I do too.
Me too.
All right. All right. Hey guys, we'll get started. Don't give this part, John. I just wanted to introduce Kelly Brown to you. I've been working with her for a couple of years now with Prevail as we are highlighting healthy relationships. Last year, Kelly presented at one of our parent nights, and the information was so good that we go, okay, we want our staff to hear this and we want parents to hear it. So her presentation, some of it will be maybe what parents should hear, but I thought we want to hear what parents should hear anyway. A, some of us are parents, and B, just to kind of know, being partners with both, just kind of getting that. And so we are going to post this link for teachers and parents. So some of it will be applicable to both, but certainly there'll be good information for teachers as well. The other reason I wanted to make sure to do this year is we also have coming up, and the CADS voted on this happening during our English 10 I-STEP week, where we will go back to that supplemental time. Remember that kind of alternate schedule, that we will actually show a Teen Lures presentation during one of those supplemental periods, okay? So this is a really good background information and good in preparation for you to be in the room kind of with students when they're hearing that. Some, you'll see, I was shocked by some of the info, some of it not, but just really, really good. Gives us a good idea of just what our teens are going through these days, how things have even changed. So welcome, Kelly. I know you'll be a good audience. Keep in mind with chatter and different things, A-Stroke's getting this on video. We are going to get this out there, so we want to keep our volume level minimum. But thanks again for coming, and Kelly, I'll turn it over to you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. As we get started, just a couple quick housekeeping notes. If you prefer to follow along on your own device, you'll see a link at the top of the screen at presentpane.com/Kelly_Groudon. You can pull that up on your iPads, phones, whatever, and follow along on your device if you prefer. That will also give you the opportunity to submit anonymous questions as we go through. So if you have something and you don't want to throw it out in front of the whole group, you can go ahead and shoot questions to me that way, and they'll pop up here for me. We can address those as we go along. Otherwise, feel free to raise your hand, ask questions if we go. If you need clarification or need me to repeat anything, please just give me a little bit of a wave. Some people tell me I talk super fast, so if I'm going like crazy mile a minute, give me a little wave and I'll slow down for you. So feel free to pull that up on your devices if you would like to kind of follow along. You'll see the same slides I have here. Okay. So as Alicia mentioned, I work with Prevail. We are an agency based in Noblesville. We serve all of Hamilton County and the surrounding areas, and we work with victims of crime and abuse. So most of our clients come to us after experiencing something super traumatic. I'd say our bread and butter is domestic violence. I'd say about 50 to 60% of our clients come in after experiencing domestic violence. Many of our clients have experienced sexual assault, and the remainder come from things like stalking, harassment, intimidation, things like that for the most part. We work with kids as young as 6 years old, so kids, teens, and adults. We see, I'd say about a third of our clients are under the age of 18. Last year we served over 3,500 people from Hamilton County. And just to kind of give you an idea of the numbers and where we're at. I believe in 2018, our numbers for teens and adolescents coming to see us were somewhere between 500 and 700. Okay, and so those are your students who are coming into our doors every day. Okay. So it just kind of gives you a little bit of a background on Prevail. we felt it was really important to start focusing heavily on prevention. Okay, we have awesome advocates that do a wonderful job when your kids have experienced something traumatic and need assistance. Our advocates are great and they're there for those kids 100%. But we kind of hope your kids don't need us in the first place, right? That's the ultimate goal. And so the last several years we've been focusing a lot on prevention, and a big piece of that has been teen dating violence. We're noticing that adolescents in need of services is our fastest growing population. In fact, we've added 3 new youth advocates since I started about 3.5 years ago. So our youth service team has doubled in that time, because as soon as we open up the availability, we have more kids coming in to fill those slots. And so our adolescent services are our fastest growing. As prevention specialist at Prevail, a big part of my job is working with teens on healthy relationships. So I go out to junior highs, high schools, different extracurricular groups, whoever will have me, and I get to work with your kiddos one-on-one or in small groups about, hey, what is a healthy relationship? What does that look like? What are some of those skills that you can have? And what are some of those warning signs for maybe a not so healthy relationship? That's been great, and we love working with kids. I love having the opportunity to hang out with teenagers and talk to them about these things and hear their thoughts. But we've discovered a big piece of that was, or a big piece of that prevention work was missing, right? And so as we're working with teens, that's all well and good, but if we're the only ones talking to them and they get to see us once, maybe once a year, if they're lucky, it doesn't really do a lot of good. And so we've really been kind of pushing our efforts to focus on parents and educators as well. And that way we can all attack this from different fronts and hopefully make kind of a dent in those numbers of kids needing our services. So today we're going to focus on teen dating violence. Okay, February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month. So that's a whole big mouthful. Okay, so the first thing that I'll ask you to do is kind of look through these situations. These are things that come up regularly with some of our teens. And think about how you feel about those scenarios. Okay, are they abusive? Are they healthy? Are they normal parts of a relationship? If your partner controls your social media accounts, and you feel like you can share things with each or with your partner, but you also feel like you can keep some things private. Your partner says you don't really love them because you want to go to a movie with a friend instead of spending alone time with your partner. Your partner threatens to tell other people about your sex life or share private photographs or texts. And you and your partner agree to take the night off from texting or calling each other, but while you're out with your friends, your partner calls and texts you multiple times to say they miss you. Your partner tells you they wouldn't hit you if you just did things the right way. These are scenarios that teens often face in their relationships. Okay? And a lot of times, when I bring these to kids and I say, hey, tell me how you feel about this. What do you think? They'll say, oh yeah, that sounds fine. That's normal. I don't care if my partner controls my social media. I don't care if they look at my phone. They can read my text messages. It's really sweet when they call me and they text me all the time to check up on me. Okay? It just means that they care. And when my partner gets really jealous, that must mean that he really loves me. And so these are some of the perceptions that our teens have about relationships. And we find that a little bit alarming, right? A lot of these behaviors, I hope most of us can agree as adults, are relatively unhealthy. If your partner's guilting you into spending time with them, if your partner's isolating you from your other friends and family, if your partner's controlling access to your own accounts, if your partner's hitting you, those are pretty big warning signs for an abusive relationship. It can be hard to pinpoint that though. Right? The messages that we send kids about relationships, either through examples, through conversations that we have, or through the relationships that they see with their peers around them, through what they see on TV, movies, music, it can be really hard to pinpoint some of these unhealthy behaviors because they're portrayed as normal so often. And So it's crucial for us to come in and talk to our kids about what is healthy, what is normal, what should be expected in a relationship, and where we should draw those lines. Every relationship exists somewhere on what we call the relationship spectrum, ranging from healthy to abusive. And healthy relationships are based on respect and trust and honesty and communication and equality and building each other up and supporting each other and all of those good things that we want from a relationship. No one's in control. There's a little bit of give and take. We're considerate of our partners. We care about their feelings. And if we have a problem, because everybody's going to fight sometimes, right? If we have a problem, we can go to our partner and say, you make me feel bad when you did this. Or I don't like it when this happens. And we can respond and we can talk that out and we can have a conversation about that. Okay, that's a healthy relationship. In an unhealthy relationship, we feel a lot of pressure from our partner. It's that you don't really love me unless you do this. There's maybe some breaks in communication, use of the silent treatment, maybe dishonesty or lying, struggling for control, inconsiderate behavior. Then on the far end of the spectrum are abusive relationships. Abusive relationships are based on power and control. And one person is in charge of that relationship. They're characterized by isolation, cutting your partner off from their friends and family and support systems, by pressuring your partner to do things that they're not comfortable doing, and manipulating your partner, and by blaming your partner for your own behavior. Oftentimes we'll hear abusers say things like, I wouldn't have to hit you if you just did what I wanted. You make me so mad when you talk to other guys, but I just can't control myself. So placing that blame on the victim. And constant accusations of lying and cheating. And all of this characterizes an abusive relationship. Now, relationships can move on the spectrum, right? We can see some unhealthy and unhealthy behaviors in the same relationship. We can see a relationship that starts as healthy become unhealthy or become abusive. And so there is some wiggle room there that can shift, or we see things that are maybe healthy and we see other behaviors that are not so healthy. And so there is a little bit of wiggle room there, but that's generally how we characterize relationships. Okay? So when we talk about healthy relationships, we're talking about that respect and equality and communication and support and trust. Now when we say abuse, what we're talking about is a pattern of behaviors used to exert power and control over your dating partner. Use the term dating violence or abuse relatively interchangeably. Now, oftentimes we have a kind of dominant narrative, right, of the male abusing the female partner, but that's not always the case. Okay, anybody can be a victim, anybody can be a perpetrator. Okay, so we see females abusing males, and we see dating violence occur in same-sex relationships about as often as in heterosexual relationships as well. Anybody can be a victim, doesn't matter your gender, your socioeconomic background, your race. We see victims and perpetrators from every group. Oftentimes the first thing that we think of when we talk about abuse is physical abuse, right? We picture the hitting, the choking, the black eyes, the bruises. Physical abuse is generally relatively easy to identify if we see it happen. Okay, we know somebody is physically hitting us. Emotional abuse is a lot harder. Okay, so emotional abuse consists of insults, put downs, threatening your partner, humiliating them, making fun of them in front of your friends, spreading rumors about them, trying to control you, telling you who you can hang out with, who you can talk to, what you should be wearing. Constant accusations of lying or cheating. And oftentimes, we'll see emotionally abusive partners threaten to harm themselves as a way to manipulate their partner. So we hear people say things like, if you leave me, I'm gonna kill myself. And it's a manipulative behavior we categorize as emotional abuse. Okay, sexual abuse, of course, includes any kind of violation of your sexual consent, unwanted touching, kissing, contact, anything you're not comfortable doing, restricting access to birth control, it's another form of sexual violence. And of course, cyber or digital abuse, anything that happens online, texting, posting inappropriate photos, sharing private things on social media, constantly checking your partner's phone or email or whatever else they use to communicate, and constantly calling and texting to check up on you. Now, oftentimes I'll have kids tell me, my mom calls me every hour when I'm out. Is that abuse? Well, no, of course not, right? Your mom has an obligation to keep you safe. Okay? And so that intent behind the behavior is really important when we're defining abuse. Okay? And so if your partner's checking up on you, who are you with? What are you doing? Where are you? Why aren't you here? When are you going to be home? Okay, that's a big red flag for abusive behavior. One of the reasons that we're here today is because teen dating violence is a massive issue, and I think that's really unrealized. And a lot of people don't recognize how serious dating violence can be among teenagers and how frequently it occurs. By the time they graduate high school, 1 out of every 3 teenagers will have been in an abusive relationship. And 1 out of every 3, that's a huge number. That's a huge number of kids that are going through this. And not only does it really stink while you're actually being abused by your partner, but there's also some pretty significant consequences that come along with that. Right? And so kids who are in abusive relationships often start to struggle academically. Their attendance declines. They're more likely to develop anxiety, depression, eating disorders, substance use disorders, suicidal ideation. And kids who are in abusive relationships now as teenagers are more likely to be in abusive relationships as adults later in their lives. Okay, so there's some pretty significant and long-term consequences to dating violence. We felt it was especially important to loop parents into this conversation. You know, we can go to kids all day, every day, and talk about healthy relationships. But parents are absolutely the first line of defense against this. Right? And so, nationwide, most parents say, yeah, we've got a handle on this. We talk to our kids about relationships. We're good to go. About 75% of parents feel confident that their kids are well informed and they're doing a great job talking about dating violence. Their kids have no clue. So about 74% of their sons and 66% of their daughters are like, my parents never talk to me. I don't know what they're talking about. But there's a pretty significant disconnect there. Okay. Ooh, too far. And so of those parents who do not talk to their kids, one of the largest reasons that they cite is that their kids are too young. They're not ready for that yet. They're not dating yet. Now, as educators, I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you that they really are, right? Most kids are thinking about dating relationships by 6th grade-ish. Studies show that 1 out of every 3 7th grade boys and 1 out of every 4 7th grade girls has been, or excuse me, of kids in relationships, 1 out of 3 boys and 1 out of 4 girls report physical violence at the hands of their partner. 7th grade, we're already experiencing this. Okay. Kids ages 11 to 14, so that's what, junior high age, a fifth of them can point to one of their friends that's being abused by their partner. So this "my kids are too young" thing, don't buy into that. One of the biggest struggles for parents is, what do I say? We know this is a bad issue. We know this is important. I want to talk to my kids, but how do I do that? Right? So what can you do? Talk to your kids and talk to them early and often. That's our number one advice. Talk to your kids early and often. As you prepare to have that conversation with your kids, reflect upon your own values and experiences. And what is it that you want to say? What's the message you want to get across? What does your own relationship look like? And as you're sharing that relationship spectrum with your kids and you're talking about what does a healthy relationship look like, think about what does your relationship look like? Does yours fit that definition? Would your kid think that your relationship fits that definition? Look for those opportunities to talk to your kids when you can. And think about where you're at. Maybe in front of their friends probably isn't the best time to have that conversation. But if you're picking them up from school, you're driving to grandma's house, you have some one-on-one time, that's an awesome opportunity to broach this subject. Okay, think about private, no pressure spaces. And try to keep the conversation as natural as possible. This is a tough one for a lot of parents, believe it or not, because we have this idea of talking about dating relationships and sex with our kids as the talk, right? Like big capital T talk, like it's a one-time event and it's a huge deal. It doesn't have to be like that. In fact, it shouldn't be like that. This should be an ongoing conversation between you and your kids. And so open the conversation in a natural way that makes sense. What's happening around you? Is there something that's occurred in your lives recently that would spark this conversation? Using media is a great way to do that. Think about what your kids are watching on TV, what's happening in the news, the song you're hearing on the drive home from school. Okay, is there a good opportunity to talk about those relationships being portrayed? I know a lot of kids right now are very into the Netflix shows 13 Reasons Why and You, right? I don't know if you're hearing a lot of that talk in the hallway. If you hear your kids watching that, I would absolutely dive in and talk about those issues with them. There's some pretty scary examples of dating violence and sexual violence in those shows. That gives you a great opportunity to engage with them in a pretty natural way. Be prepared to be honest with your kids. If you're not honest with your kids about dating relationships, you're going to lose your credibility. And you're not going to be a safe person to go to anymore. Okay, so be prepared to tell your kids the whole truth. If they ask you questions about your relationship, your experiences, what you see, okay, your opinions, be prepared to share those with them honestly. As you're talking with your kids, focus on helping them learn the difference between being assertive and being aggressive. When I go out and I talk to kids about dating violence and I ask them, why do you think abuse happens so much? Many of them tell me because people are angry. They don't know how to control their anger. We all get angry sometimes, right? It's a normal emotion. We all feel that way sometimes, but we're not all abusive to our partners. Okay, and the difference there is that intent. Are we trying to exert control over our partner? And so sharing this with your kids, helping them learn to be assertive and get their needs met without being aggressive towards their partner is essential to helping them develop healthy relationship skills. Help your child learn to solve problems on their own. You're not always going to be there to walk through their issues with them as they happen in real time. So teach your kids the skills that they need to solve their own problems. Okay? What's the issue? What's happening? What are some possible solutions? And what are the consequences of those solutions? What will happen if you do X, Y, or Z? Okay, help your child recognize warning signs of an abusive relationship. So some of those things that we looked at earlier, like constant texting and constant communication, checking your phone, wanting control over your social media. If those things are happening in your kid's relationship, they need to be alert and aware of their partner becoming more abusive. Seems like kind of an obvious one, but focus on your kid. Put your phones down for a little while. Have a face-to-face conversation with them as you're doing this. Make sure they know that you see this as essential and important enough to be the only thing you're focused on. Check in often with your kids. Talk about these things a lot. It doesn't have to be a one-time conversation. It doesn't have to be a big, scary, intimidating thing. Check in with your kid regularly. Okay? If you know they're having problems with a friend, or you know they're having problems with their dating partner, ask them how that's going periodically. Be prepared to to answer your child's questions as needed, and be sure you know what they're trying to ask. Okay, kids may not have the language or the vocabulary to ask some of these things yet, and so be prepared to help them develop those thoughts. And be honest and open to their ideas. As we talk about relationship behaviors, it's important for us to recognize where kids are coming from, why they think some things are healthy and normal, and why they think some things are problematic. Okay, so be open to their ideas, exploring that. Be prepared to say, you don't know. Okay, that's totally okay. There's some great resources that you and your kids can use together to find answers to your questions. And do not avoid uncomfortable topics like sex. You know, it feels a little bit icky sometimes to talk to our kids about some of these things, but if you shut down that conversation, you're shutting down that line of communication between you and your kids. And that's not something that you want to do. Talking to your kids about dating violence is really intimidating, and I recognize that, and I sympathize with that. Brainstorm some topics that you want to communicate with your kids. Think through that message that you want to share, but recognize that they have their own topics and their own questions and their own ideas as well. There's no need for this to be a big, intimidating lecture. It doesn't have to be scary. It can be comfortable and organic for both of you. Even if your child isn't dating yet and you know they're not dating yet, they still have ideas about relationships, and they're still forming those opinions and those beliefs. Okay, and so have this conversation with them, even if they're not dating yet. That's okay. Help them develop that message and those expectations for a healthy relationship before they even get into a relationship. Okay, here's some great ideas for discussion starters. How would you treat somebody? How are your friends treating you? So of course, our social skills with our friends translate into our skills with our partner. Is there a good way to argue? How do you have a healthy conflict resolution? What does it mean to stand up for yourself? What happens if your partner is putting you down? How do you handle that? How does that feel? I want to touch a little bit on this issue of consent. This can be a really scary topic to talk about because it's not something that we've talked about traditionally, right? Generally, we've shared the idea that no means no, and we kind of leave it at that. Okay, but consent is a lot bigger than that. Okay, it's a lot more nuanced than that. Talking to your kids about consent is essential to not only protecting them from becoming a victim, but to also keep them from becoming a perpetrator. And no one wants to think of their kid as somebody who would harm another person, right? We never think of that. We never imagine that. Right? And yet we see story after story after story coming out of college campuses about sexual assault. And it all comes down to this murky issue of consent. And so being prepared to talk about consent is essential to protecting your kid from both angles. Okay? Consent is, when we talk about consent, we're talking about permission, of course, right? When we talk about sexual consent, that's permission to engage in a particular sexual activity. It is specific. It's a one-time thing. We're going to do this day at this time. And your child has the right to withdraw their consent at any time. Okay? And so even if they're with their partner and they say, hey, let's have sex, and things start heating up, and they say, you know what, I'm not comfortable, I'm ready to, I'm changing my mind, that needs to stop. Okay, that consent is withdrawn, and their partner needs to stop. Consent cannot be coerced. It cannot be given under threats or duress. If I put a gun to your head and say, give me all of your money, does that mean that you do? Does that mean you really wanted to give me your cash in the first place? Of course not. Right? You felt threatened, you felt under duress. And so you complied. To kids, that idea is often translated to sexual activity in their relationships. Right? If their partner says something like, if you don't have sex with me, I'm going to break up with you. That's a really scary threat to a lot of kids. Right? Maybe to adults it sounds silly and we're like, oh, okay, bye. Right? But to kids, that's scary. That pressure to be in a relationship and to be part of that couple is very real. And so that's a very real threat. And we would consider that coercion. One caveat that a lot of people have been having a really hard time understanding lately is that consent cannot be given by someone who is inebriated or intoxicated. People who are drunk, passed out, high, whatever, cannot give their consent. And this is especially important to stress with your kids who are getting ready to be out on their own for the first time. Right? So we see, we think of college as this wonderful hookup culture place, right? We have this vision of these frat parties and everybody's getting drunk and everybody's hooking up. And that's where we hear those stories about sexual assault over and over and over and over again. Your children need to understand that if they have sex with somebody who is intoxicated and cannot consent, they can be charged with assault. Right? Even if they face no legal charges, they can be kicked out of school, they can lose scholarships, they can be kicked off sports teams, whatever is important to them. Okay, there are very real consequences for not following this definition of consent. And finally, consent cannot be assumed. It doesn't matter what your relationship is. It doesn't matter the reputation that you have. It doesn't matter if you've had sex with that person before. Consent cannot be assumed. You need to check in with your partner every single time. It's kind of a hard thing to push on our kids and explain to our kids, but it's essential that they understand this definition of consent. Just to clarify that a little bit.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they go, oh my God, I would love a cup of tea, thank you. Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes please, that's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. you should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it, going, but you wanted tea last week. Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat, going, but you wanted tea last night. But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
I hope that's not good.
Alright, I love that video, and it's such a silly way to illustrate such an important concept, but I think it really helps hammer some of those points home. Alright, by the way, those of you that have younger kids, there is an awesome version of that designed for like preschool, kindergarten age that you can certainly find as well. So another behavior that I wanted to kind of touch on is stalking. Okay, and this is something that we tend to not take very seriously in our society because it doesn't seem very dangerous all the time. Most people kind of chalk it up as just being kind of creepy and weird, and then we let it go. The fact is that stalking is extremely dangerous. Out of women who are killed by their intimate partners, over 3/4 of them have been stalked before, and by the person who kills them. Stalking is not something that goes away easily. In fact, the longer stalkers go on, the more intense and more aggressive and more violent their behaviors can become. And so if stalking has become an issue for your kids, you should definitely seek help from a place like Prevail or law enforcement, right, to ensure their safety. These are some of the behaviors that we would consider stalking: following you, showing up where you're at, sending unwanted gifts, damaging your property, checking your phone calls, using cameras or GPS to track where you're going, and hanging out a lot at places that you frequent, spreading rumors, posting information about you, posting personal things. Oftentimes, this is something that kind of goes hand in hand with abusive relationships. Abusers may turn to stalking their victims or their partners, and we see it frequently after abusive relationships end. And so sometimes that breakup is not always the end of the threat for your kids. And so you need to be aware of what some of these behaviors may look like. So if your child is ever in that situation, you can get them the help that they need. So we talked about some of the warning signs of somebody being abused, but one question that we get a lot is, how do I know if my child is the perpetrator? And what happens if they're the abuser? What can I watch for? So if your child is constantly putting down their partner, if they're extremely possessive, if they are isolating themselves from their friends and family, we're seeing lots of mood swings. If you catch them checking their partner's phone or social media, telling them what they can and can't do, or of course causing physical harm, you need to have a conversation with your child about the way that they're treating their partner. Oftentimes, teens learn about relationships in places that we don't want them learning about relationships, right? From their peers who are equally uninformed, from media, like movies, TV, music. There's some kind of twisted ideas about what relationships should look like represented in our entertainment. Okay, and so if you catch your child doing any of these things, it's essential to nip that in the bud right away and have that conversation with them about how they can be a better partner. You know, you all work kind of hand in hand with your students' parents, right? You're kind of that team backing them up, and oftentimes you spend more time with teens than their own parents do, right? You get to see them 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Right? And oftentimes educators are in a better position to notice certain behaviors and certain warning signs of dating violence even than parents, right? Because you not only see those kids in their natural element, but you get to see them in their social clique, right? You know who they're around, you hear the rumors, you hear the gossip. And so I want to touch on some of the things that you are all in a unique position to notice when it comes to dating violence. If you're seeing a student who suddenly develops problems with their attendance, if they're showing up late or they're not showing up at all, if their academic performance is slipping, and they've gone from an A student who always turns in their work to someone who might occasionally throw something at you, but it's not very well done. It's kind of a red flag, right? That would probably raise some suspicions for some of you that something's going on, okay, whether it's dating violence or something else. If your star basketball player suddenly stops showing up for practice, or your lead actress in the play drops out, and that lack of interest or loss of interest in extracurricular activities, unexplained changes in their demeanor and their behavior and the way they're interacting with their peers and their classmates, those are pretty significant red flags. One thing that kind of pops up and can offer you on notice is when kids request a schedule change. And I know that's a huge hassle to deal with. Right, I used to teach high school myself, and you know, once you get beyond those first couple of days of that semester or trimester, it's a pain in the butt to move kids around, right? But if a kid is coming to you asking to change their schedule or asking to change their classes, please listen to that and investigate why that might be. I bet money it's going beyond that teacher doesn't like me or their class is too hard. Kids requesting a schedule change are often looking for a way to get away from somebody who is not treating them the way they need to be treated. From somebody who is abusive towards them, somebody who's stalking them, somebody who's threatening them. So that is a great opportunity for you to have a conversation with that kid about what is happening that's prompting this request. Of course, any sort of physical injury is always kind of a red flag, right? You know, kids get bumps and bruises and that's okay, but when you're saying it over and over and over and they can't explain that, that's certainly a cause for concern. And apologizing for their partner's behavior. This goes back to that idea of victim blaming, right? And so if you see one of your students and their partner come in and their partner's kind of rude to you, or is jerking them around or something like that, and your student is making excuses, I would be really concerned about that. If they're trying to explain away that bad behavior. So those are some unique situations that may come up among your students and in your classroom. So I'm sure all of you are here wondering, okay, we know teen dating violence is a problem. We know tons of kids are experiencing this. We know what parents can do. What can I do in my classroom or in my school? First of all, recognize that your words matter. Okay? The way that you talk about people and your own relationships and your relationships with your students, those are important and kids internalize those. Set a positive example. Think about the way you're talking with your peers and your colleagues and the kids themselves, and ensure you're treating everybody with respect. Call out harmful behavior when you see it. This is a tough one because I know when you're surrounded by kids all the time, your attention is in 50 different places at once. right? And so it's easy to let it go if you hear one kid calling another a name or something along those lines, but call out that behavior when you see it as often as you can. Check in with your students, all of them, as often as you can. Certainly if you have a concern. And make healthy relationships a normal part of your class. Of course, building that rapport with your kids, we talk about that all the time in your professional development, right? It's essential to have good relationships. If you don't have good relationships with your students, they're not going to learn as much, right? Integrate that into your classroom in the way that your kids are interacting with themselves. And look for opportunities to include this kind of information into your classroom. This year, Prevail released a teen dating violence toolkit for educators that we are happy to share with you. You can find that on our website. It has all kinds of awesome activities for you. If you have 5 minutes to wrap up a class discussion, there's something for you there. If you have 3 weeks that you want to fill with lesson plans, we have something for you there. Okay, so kind of run the gamut there. So please check that out. Look at some of those activities and ways that you can incorporate that. Love is Respect is another one of my favorite resources for healthy relationships. They have some pretty cool activities for you as well. All right, what do you do once you find a kid who you are pretty sure is in an abusive relationship? How can you help them? Offer support, not advice. Start by listening to those kids, understand where they're coming from, and be supportive of that student, whatever it is that they need at that time. Okay? It's easy to jump into that grown-up mode where you want to just tell that kid what to do. Right? Here's the problem, here's how you fix it, case closed. Okay? That's not what your kids are looking for from you. Okay, so be supportive, hear them out, listen to them, believe them. So many kids are afraid of coming forward with their story because they don't think anyone will listen to them. They don't think anyone will believe that their partner is abusive. Help your kids find a professional, whether that's someone at Prevail or another local resource or a national resources. Get them connected with someone who can help. It's really tempting to badmouth their partner, right? Oh, they're such a jerk. That's going to put that kid on the defensive. Right? Or for parents, it's really tempting to say, well, then you just need to break up with them, don't see them anymore, right? Case closed, easy. Even if your kid's telling you that they're breaking up with their partner, they're probably still seeing them behind your back. Okay? And you've just made yourself somebody that they can't turn to anymore. So as much as you want to solve that problem for them, as much as you want to tell them what to do, and help them realize how negative their partner is behaving, be there, be supportive, and empower them to make their own choices. It's tempting to go to their partner and say, you need to knock this off. You need to stop doing this. Oftentimes that makes that situation worse. Okay, so stay on the end of the victim and offer support to them. Remember, as frustrating as it can be to see people who you know are being abused in a relationship, stay in that relationship. On average, it takes 7 to 9 attempts for a woman to leave an abusive relationship. Right? And that comes from all sorts of different places. It's scary, it's intimidating, they don't want to be alone, they're afraid of what their partner is going to do to them, they're afraid their partner might hurt their friends or family. Okay? It's really hard to walk away from an abusive relationship. If you haven't been in that situation, that can be really hard to understand. Like, why would you want to stay with somebody who's treating you like that? But often that love and that emotional connection is still there, and it can be difficult to walk away from that. Okay, so be supportive of your kids who are in that situation. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, Prevail is based in Noblesville. We serve victims of crime and abuse. We work with kids as young as 6. Everything we do is free of charge to all of our clients. And nobody has to pay to get services. We don't want financial barriers to be the reason someone's not getting help. And we do have a confidentiality policy as well, so we don't share client information. We offer several different kinds of services. Crisis services, we have a 24-hour crisis line so you can get in touch with an advocate anytime. We are the point of contact for protective orders in Hamilton County, so you would come and see us if you needed a protective order. We respond to hospital call-outs. We work with our partners in law enforcement to provide on-scene advocacy. We are a non-residential facility, so we do not have people living at Prevail, but we can help people get connected to that shelter if that's a need. And we work with Cherish Center, our child advocacy response, our child advocacy center in Hamilton County. We offer ongoing services for individuals and groups. And the biggest part of that is safety planning and helping them stay safe no matter what option they choose. Okay, finding resources and referrals to meet their individual situation, identifying their own goals. We offer psychoeducational advocacy, so we're not therapists, but we do help people cope with their trauma. We do court support, we do employment support, victim impact panel in the county, and of course our support groups for kids, teens, and adults. Oftentimes those groups can be really beneficial for people who have experienced trauma to connect with other people who have experienced something similar. That can be very beneficial to that healing process. So we offer lots of different groups for kids, teens, and adults. We do offer animal-assisted intervention. This is Odell. He is our facility dog and our busiest advocate. He works with our youth team, so often clients like to come and just kind of decompress with Odell a little bit, and he's pretty awesome. He is a 9-year-old double doodle. And so I forget which way it goes, but one of his parents was a golden doodle, one was a labradoodle. We also run a couple different groups with Agape Therapeutic Riding Center. So for teens or adults who have experienced sexual assault, they kind of go out there and work with those animals, work with the horses there, and that can be really beneficial for them as well. One thing that's unique about that that I want to mention is that we offer secondary victim services. So oftentimes we work with the families of kids and teens who have been sexually assaulted. Right? If your child is assaulted, you're going to have some feelings, and we want to be there to support you in that as well. And so that's kind of a unique service that we offer. Okay. There's our contact information. If you ever have any questions, comments, concerns, looking for resources, you can find us any of those places. As I mentioned, we have a 24-hour crisis line, so you can reach an advocate any time in the day. This month for Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, we've had some pretty awesome social media materials on responding to disclosures. So if somebody comes up to you and says, my partner is abusing me, your response is essential, right? Being that first person they come to, you can make or break it for that person. Okay? And so if you want tips for how to talk to somebody when they disclose to you, check out our social media this month. There's some great material there. All right, so a couple questions. One question that came through are the stats given about teen dating violence national or local? Those are national statistics. So the 1 in 3 teens is nationwide. Are there any other questions I can answer for you all? Wrap up for the day. Yeah.
Your Noblesville office, how often is it open?
We are open Monday through Friday, and our hours are kind of different. So usually there's somebody there no later than 9 o'clock, and then in the evening, our advocates set their own appointments, and so oftentimes you'll see somebody there until 8 or 9. And our support groups are all run in the evening from 6 to about 8 o'clock, so it gives everybody a chance to get home from work and settled. Yeah.
Would that be a resource for someone to come there, show up? I mean, after school, after hours?
Sure, yeah. So as long as somebody is there, essentially, we have a crisis walk-in service. Most of the time we don't always have somebody at the door after 5 o'clock. just because our advocates may be running around with their group or their clients. But definitely between 9 and 5, Monday through Friday, you can always find somebody who's there for a crisis walk-in. So yeah, they can show up. It might take us a little time if we're busy with appointments, but we'll get them in with an advocate and we'll get their needs met. Other questions?
I'm just kind of curious, how does Hamilton County compare with the national stats?
That's a good question. So I don't know in terms of 1 and 3 and all that. We haven't done enough widespread data to do that. It's the kids that are showing up at our doors, the ones that we have contact with, they're the ones that we know need help and are seeking help. I promise you there's a lot more that need help that aren't getting it yet. So I don't know exactly what that looks like, but yeah, like I said, on average we serve between 500 and 700 teens a year looking for these services, so that's quite a few. And others? Yeah.
Kind of comment and then a question. I was surprised that like the statistics for same-sex couples pretty much mirrors the straight population, so that kind of surprised me. But the reason I'm bringing it up is there's so much stigma. I mean, I know any victim, it's hard to come forward, but I think it's more socially acceptable that this is being done to a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice for, like, if a boy were really to reach out and you feel like something like that's going on, or you even observe it, do you have any hint, because there's such...
Yeah, that's a tough situation for sure. And if we go kind of back to that stats page from the beginning, at the middle school level, it's more common for boys to experience physical abuse, and a large part of that is that social stigma, right? That we think it's funny when girls slap a guy, and guys aren't going to. Many guys won't come forward and say, "Oh, this little girl is beating me up," right? That's embarrassing. You look like a sissy in front of your friends, and you don't want that, association. Ultimately, though, about a quarter of our clients are male. So it is something that we see more and more. I think encouraging them, especially having a male role model for that student, come forward and say, "Hey, there's no shame in this." If that opportunity is available, would be extremely helpful. And talking about it, just recognizing the fact that there are so many male victims of dating violence and of sexual violence that we just often overlook. It's sad that that's not part of our bigger discussion more often, big picture, because we like to think of that battered woman syndrome, like that's what comes to mind so often. And I wish we would include more conversation about male victims nationally. But yeah, encouraging them, assuring them that there are resources available. We're happy to work with male clients. We do it all the time. Having positive male role models in their life, encouraging them, I think, is a great place to start. Other questions? That's it. Well, thank you all for your time. I appreciate you being here. Please reach out if there's anything we can do for you. We're happy to come in and chat with your classes, answer your questions. The toolkit's available for you online. Whatever we can do to support you, please let us know.
Thank you.